Good afternoon. We will get started in about 5 minutes. We're just going to give folks the opportunity to come in so that our guest today, does not get interrupted by a lot of people. So at 2:05, we will get started. So we will be getting started in 2 minutes. All right, good afternoon. I want to thank you all for joining us today on this here Bring a Hacker to Work Day. I'm very excited. Our guest today is Ms. Kimber Dowsett. She is the Director of Security Engineering at Trust, which is a software infrastructure consulting firm that focuses on both the private and the public sectors. So she's going to be talking to us today about her work as a security engineer and how she made it to the top of the security engineering food chain. So the Director of Security Engineering for TrustWorks, Ms. Kimber Dowsett.
Hi, thanks for having me. Super excited. Have no idea what we're going to talk about, so I'll let you drive. I assume you want some sort of intro to.
Yeah, that would be great if you could just tell us about yourself and how you got to where you're at. I know a lot of the squad would be interested in knowing, how you got into security engineering specifically, anything as far as certifications or not vouchers, certifications or like education or anything that, that allowed you to get to where you're at today.
Sure. I'll give you like the 5-minute overview of the last 15 years. So I actually went to college for art. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I enjoyed working with computers. I decided to get into graphic design because I thought that was the way to use computers and art. So the long story short was I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in art with the focus on mixed media, mostly computers. That was about, I graduated from college 9 years after high school. So it wasn't just like a straight through. I wasn't a fit for college, so I had to find my way into that world with a topic that interested me. So I finished my bachelor's and I decided to go to grad school, and I got a master's in new media theory, which is also just a fancy way of saying that I used mixed media for art. The bulk of my thesis work was based on medical imagery that I obtained without permission from several hospitals for CAT scans and MRIs, X-rays, things like that, and I turned them into art. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do after grad school. I had representation from a couple of galleries. I was really excited to make art things, and I got a call from Apple. Apple asked me to come and help. They had launched retail stores, and they were launching a program called the Creative Program, where basically they would have Apple employees train customers on how to use like artist software. So the Adobe Creative Suite, and then Apple had their own suite like Final Cut Pro, their music software, things like that. So I decided, okay, cool, that it would be a paying gig. So I went out to California to train for their creative program. And on the second day, I wandered out to the snack area of the training center, and I saw all these people in a room tearing apart computers, like literally tearing into computers. And that looked so much more fun than studying a script for how to teach Photoshop, that I asked like how I could be in that class tearing apart computers. And they were like, oh, that's genius training. That's, you have to pass and test to get to go to genius training. And I was like, that's weird. I just want to do that. And they were like, well, you can't do that. I'm sorry, my hair clip, I think, is probably causing some rattling. Well, so the TLDR there is the third day that I showed up for creative training, I just went to the genius class and I sat down at a desk like I belonged there. And the instructor just looked at me. He was scared to ask me to leave. I didn't say anything. I just picked up the screwdriver and put on the anti-static wristband, strapped myself to a table, and like dared somebody to tell me to leave. You probably couldn't get away with that now, but that's how it went down. So halfway through that day, the instructor did pull me aside during lunch to say, you're not supposed to be here. I checked, and I was like, well, this is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. So I can go home or I can stay. So there was a little shuffling about, and anyway, they let me stay. So fast forward 3 weeks later, I graduated from their training program. I was the only person in my class to pass all 3 of their certification exams, which were desktop repair, laptop repair, and then OS 10 certification. And I made it through all the coursework for their OS 10 server certification. They didn't offer an exam at the time. So that was the story of how I landed in tech. So I got, I finished training in California. I ended up in an Apple store as a genius. I was the only female in the first major batch of genius graduates. And it took me about a year before I was the lead genius at my own store. So I was in charge of the tech team because I had like the fastest, most successful repair numbers. I was configuring all the local retail stores that had opened at the time, their networks. And about 6 months after I was promoted to lead, they made up a new job for me called Regional Lead Genius Mentor. So I traveled up and down the East Coast, training other geniuses locally on the East Coast for how to fix Mac operating system problems, how to break the Mac operating system, how to configure networks. I just found a thing I liked and I dove in. It was great. So a few years in, I reached a point where the only move for me was to go back to California at Apple headquarters and work there. And I didn't really want to do that. I enjoyed my life on the East Coast. So I took a job at a startup in an engineering bullpen. They called me ops at first because they weren't quite sure. I was setting up networks and configuring the application we were building for network connectivity and hooking to APIs and things like that, kind of learning on the fly. And then a few months later, they called it QA engineering. So I became like this startup's first QA engineer. But what we called QA engineering then, we would call pen testing now, because I was like breaking the app every way I knew how with, everything from input field validation to SQL injection to busting their JavaScript. So that was super fun. My job for a while was just breaking the thing that we were building, and I really enjoyed that work. And then our startup was purchased by a subsidiary of The Economist. So I found myself working in a corporate environment, and it took about 3 weeks for the new CTO we got to come in to say, he'd read an article in Wired magazine that Java was the next best thing, and we had to rebuild our application that we poured our blood, sweat, and tears into, in Perl, by the way, that we were going to have to rebuild it in Java. Only none of us were Java programmers. So we had this period of time for the next 18 months or so that we basically, if you've ever seen that show Silicon Valley, where they don't know what to do with Big Head, so they just put him on the roof and he like drinks beer and eats pizza, and that's his job because he has no position. That's kind of what we did for about 18 months after our acquisition. But meanwhile, we were building other things. So several of my colleagues went on to build a website called ThinkGeek. It was a shopping retailer. Some of you might remember. I went on to a company called Arbitron that did radio ratings the same way Nielsen does TV ratings. And then that company was acquired by Nielsen. So I was doing big data security at that point. Our flagship product was a transponder that folks would wear on their person at all time, and it would pick up and it would record to pick up on which radio stations people were listening to. But it wasn't just recording the commercials or the tones, it was actually recording folks' daily lives. So that became ethically problematic for me to work in that space. And fortunately, I got a call from NASA. So I ended up going to NASA for the scariest technical interview of my entire life. I had to take a break in the middle of it and go puke. Like, I was freaking out. I came back. I answered the questions as best I could. Some of them I didn't know. We can come back to this later, but they were impressed that I said I didn't know, but I could Google it or check Stack Overflow and find out and like send you the answer. So I got a job offer from NASA on the drive home from the interview. So I ended up in that space for nearly 7 years, working on Solaris systems and some Hubble systems. And then, just my love of learning, I ended up stumbling into things that, ended up being new and kind of cutting edge there at the time, like setting up Exi and virtualizing scientific machines that for years and years, people logged into separate machines separately and couldn't collaborate and work on these, they were laser cryogenics and optics systems at the same time. So that was super fun. And during my time at NASA, I was offered a 4-year appointment through the Obama administration to work at 18F. That is a digital services delivery company housed within GSA. And we worked on a lot of really cool projects, and I agreed to stay on at NASA for about 6 months till they could find another Solaris person to take over these little systems I was operating. So for 6 months, I was full-time at 18F as an infrastructuralist, and then 10 hours a week at NASA. So that 6 months turned into 4 years that I still stayed on with both. So I bled a lot, and it was okay though. By the time I left 18F, when my appointment ended, I was director of infrastructure engineering there. I landed a job at Truss, where I am now as director of security engineering. NASA, I did actually give them a 6-month deadline to find someone to replace me, and they eventually did. So that was a accumulated 10.5 years or so in federal service, working on pretty cool systems. And I thought, okay, fine, now I have one job. I'm at TrustWorks, this is great. But actually, currently, I am director of security engineering, but also acting director of our client success management practice. And I'm on the executive leadership team. And I have 6 direct reports, soon to be 7. And I actually mentor 4 other senior women within the organization. So I still can't manage to just have one job, apparently, but that's me now in a nutshell.
That sounds like good problems to have. That is so amazing. Like I'm still stuck back at, I walked my way into the genius class and, I was like, I'm here. I'm the captain now. So that's amazing. So as far as did you have to get any certifications, or how did you, I see the trajectory from the art to where you are now. But like, how did you do that? Like in the background, are you self-studying, or how did that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of that happened, through stumbling into security, right? Like that role of QA engineer really being a pen test job. And then protecting our big data house at Arbitron, which was later Nielsen, for sure, security. Like looking back now, yep, Nessus scans, patching, antivirus, cleaning registries, all that day-to-day security work. Once I was at NASA doing that kind of work, and also managing my own part of the data center for the components that I was responsible for, my boss asked if I would like to take a certification training because our department didn't have any people with certifications. I wasn't quite sure like what that meant or what I should do. The only certs I had at that point were related to Apple directly. But I ended up taking a SANS class, the incident response and incident handling, or no, exploit. I'm not sure what they call it now, but it's SEC 504. There's the short answer. So I ended up taking SEC 504. on NASA's dime, thank goodness, because certifications are super expensive. And that was a 6-day boot camp. On the 6th day, we had a CTF. Our little group of folk won the class CTF with the coin. And we did it by not actually using any of the tools they taught that entire week of training, because we were all old school Pearl people. It worked out fine. But I did decide to buckle down and take the exam, because SANS classes come with an exam attempt and a couple practice tests. So later, if you want strategies on that, we can discuss that. Or also Leslie Carhart, Hacks for Pancakes, I think on her Tizzy Phone blog, has a great how to nail a SANS exam. So I ended up getting the GCIH certification exam. And I'll say flat out that I think certifications can be real gatekeepy, employers requiring those, because they kind of dismiss the level of privilege to be able to go take those classes and exams. First, the money part. Second, just the employment part. Third, where you are in your career, right? There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. So while I'm just sort of myself as I hire and announce positions at trusts, I do not require an exam, a certification or exam certification, because of that gatekeeping aspect. It would be dishonest for me to say I didn't think it opened doors for me, because it did. I got a seat at tables that I would not have otherwise had, because as a and this is grossly gendered, grossly race oriented, but as a non-white male in tech at the time, I was the only female in the room for a good 6 years at NASA, unless the female was a project manager. Even if she was real technical, the role that she sort of got boxed into was project management. It's just how things kind of went down. So having that certification was somehow proof that I belonged there, and folks would listen to me who hadn't listened to me before, even though I didn't say anything different. I just had some letters after my name. So I was like, okay, this is kind of messed up, but cool. If this is the game we're playing, I want another certification exam. And so I set my eyes on CISSP, right? Because that's the one that the feds wanted. That's what they looked for. I do not have the CISSP, just the where that story ends up. But I did go to SANS training. They have a CISSP boot camp. It's MGT, I believe 404. The exam they offered with that course was the GISP. Same thing, same content, same 8 areas, but a different issuing authority. So it's the GIAC version of the CISSP. I will tell you flat out that I could not afford SANS training. So I did reach out, apply, pound the pavement, write letters to instructors, begging for referral to be in their, what they call their facilitator program. So that's basically a teacher's aide. You get there early, you set up the desks, you fetch him or her or them coffee, make sure, the lunch order is in. At the end of the day, you clean up. And then twice in the week, you have to just be the room monitor for their night training. But then I got that roughly $7,000 boot camp for $1,100. And that certification attempt and the practice exams and digital access for 4 months to the coursework. So that was hot. And that became more affordable. Not that $1,100 isn't a lot of money, but it's a lot less than $7,000. The next year I did the same thing with a threat intelligence class. I thought I might be interested in threat intel. Same thing. I found an instructor to vouch for me. You don't have to do that, but it sure makes it easier. And so I did the threat intelligence course, but decided actually it was interesting, but not something I'd want to pursue. So I didn't take the exam for that. It just wasn't my jam. And so, I did a lot of acronyms there. So GISP is roughly CISSP, but a different issuing authority. The GCIH is the first one I took and the only one that I still use stuff I learned in that coursework today. And then I took the threat intelligence class, but wasn't really feeling it. Separately from that, so that's my story with certifications. I have gone through, AWS has a lot of free coursework just to kind of get you around the console. That stuff's been helpful. It's like totally obsolete now, but VMware did that, you know, at the time I was setting up XeHost. It was nice to like go through VM courseware because they'd send you, you know, the books and you could just kind of go through it. And we see now government agencies that who require clearances. Another one that they look for now is the CASP plus, CASP with a plus at the end. And Sec plus now is a big one. So like on my infra team, anybody who wants to study for and take the Sec plus exam, I cover the course materials, and we have a whole list now of like free stuff out there to help you pass Sec plus, from YouTube videos to blogs, websites. But that one has ended up being one that we see requested more from agencies who want to do contract work with our consultancy. That was a lot of words, but you with me?
I appreciate all of them. So what would you suggest for someone who, you know, maybe is going from a non-traditional route? Like, what do you look for as far as your, you know, security engineers that come in, you know, for example, underneath you, you know, if someone was interested in getting into security engineering, you know, what would you recommend as far as like, you know, this is how you get started on this path? Because it sounds to me like it's, you know, you at least started as a kind of a red teamer type person. But like, I don't know if that's, you know, what you would consider yourself now, if you were to pick a side, but how would you recommend people get started in security engineering?
Yeah, so yeah, I guess that's fair to say. Started as a red teamer, definitely, definitely popped a lot of shells. Then I found myself a little more interested in blue team work because it felt like the thinking side of the game, right? You don't know how they're attacking. So I think folks who express an interest in a little more holistic view of security, I find those resumes a little more appealing. Again, I'm not like, I don't hire pen testers. I hire security engineers. It's a little bit different. Like, I'm looking for folks who can think of security. I call it baked in security, but looking at security holistically as we're considering infrastructure architecture. So ways to automate infrastructure setup. Terraform is big now. Let me just say, though, everyone who's interested in security isn't necessarily interested in infrastructure, and also may not have any interest in pen testing or doing blue team work, or for that matter, coding. Like, maybe you're really interested in GRC, like looking at compliance. There's what we used to see when I kind of came up. Security was just like, oh, that person does security, and that was just this huge all-encompassing thing. Now we see universities with, you know, different specialties. Like, you could be a computer science major with these minors in, you know, cloud governance or security, GRC, red team, right? There's so much. It's a broad landscape. So what I look for is, if I'm doing a digital screen of a resume, let's say, I want to see that there's, and this is for my team. So this isn't true of all security teams. My team is called, my practice is called InfraSec. So it's a, you know, combination of infrastructure and security. So I look for folks who have some experience with infrastructure, It's nice if they've had experience with cloud infrastructure. Though the last engineer I hired on my team, she had never worked in AWS or Azure or GCP, but she had built a pipeline on the iron at the university she was at in Python and was self-taught. So that was really intriguing to me because I feel like that showed me initiative and drive to learn and to do things. And so like the understanding of what I mean when I say an automated pipeline was there. My tools are different, but I think resumes, I look for more sort of tool agnostic and how there's just a story there about how folks are doing what they're doing, how they got where they are, that the resume has a progression that makes sense. It won't make sense to me if it says, retail at Old Navy for 5 years, and then the next job was, pen tester at Cisco. I need the story in between, right? Like retail at Old Navy for 5 years, but then there's some bullets down there, like configured the store network, found a bug in our point of sale system, or something that like shows me, aha, this is where the switch flipped, and this person became interested in this other thing that I'm hiring for now. So I think I love to see CTF stuff on resumes. I love to see just working groups, or I do enjoy seeing things that show an interest in giving back to the community, whether that's through volunteer work, equity, diversity or inclusion initiatives. And that doesn't have to be directly related to security. So I might be a little bit of an anomaly, but I do look for a human in a resume, not necessarily just like the bullet points of what your skill set are, what your skill sets are, the tools you use, and bullet points. I was pretty super excited last week to see a resume where under the last section of skills, they listed tap dancing. Like, cool. I want to see you as a human. And that actually has me more intrigued to meet you and know that like you could fit on my team because my team is full of humans. So don't be shy about the CTF stuff. If you've spoken at a conference, cool. Like put the link on your resume for it. I'd love to see it. Think of those times that you reach out in the community and speak as a little way that you've hacked adding this thing to your resume without adding extra pages to it, right? And then if the company's interested, they can go click and kind of see who you are and get more of that human piece. I don't know, is that helpful?
It definitely is. So we have another question from the folks in here. They want to know, is infrastructure experience, would that be helpful with pen testing?
It couldn't hurt to understand how infrastructure, like what I mean when I say infrastructure, what it means when I say automating the CI/CD pipeline. Maybe as a pen tester, you get really interested in looking at CI/CD, learning how to Terraform uses a Hashi's language is HCL, but using that to figure out how to deploy to an automated pipeline, then you can start thinking about, if I were an attacker, how would I want to disrupt this? Because if you get access to the pipeline, like it's game over. That's the same, that's popping the shell, getting the root, like wrecking the infra. That's where you're going to see the bigger bug bounties if you're into chasing bounty programs. That quickly becomes an O-Day. So I do not think it would hurt. But my little plug is it's a lot more interesting to build a secure infrastructure for me than it is to think about how to break it. But I do think about how to break it, but that's part of the build, right? Like the baked in security piece. So if you're interested in pen testing, for sure, that's a rich place to try to disrupt and break stuff.
So I'm familiar with infrastructure as a service, and because my husband's a cloud engineer, but we have a lot of folks in the squad who are not familiar with infrastructure. Could you provide like I guess kind of a definition of what that means as far as your work or just in general?
Yeah. So in general, the analogy would be we could think of it as a house. So the infrastructure would be those 2x4s that build the frame, the foundation that's level, the landscape that you're on, the different things that you have to consider, like wind conditions. Are you in tornado alley, right? So I'll give you the analogy, then we'll come back. So you can think about the application layer as like, okay, the house is built and now we're going to paint the walls and we're going to put in the furniture and we're going to make it livable. And it's when we think house, that's what we think. Like when we imagine a house, we imagine the pretty house with the shutters and the front door and the floor mat and all the furniture. So that's the application layer. So in my day-to-day, the infrastructure is we're doing everything right now. I don't think we have any clients. Right. No, everything we have in flight right now is built in AWS. So everything from how the architecture is going to be constructed, we rely a lot on Fargate right now, and we won't go into all the details of that, but a good thing to look up would be Fargate. We have pieces of our infrastructure relying on Atlantis. That's a piece of Terraform. So, but not to get like too far into the weeds, but basically, if you want an application, so let's say it's a website that does something, sells flowers, you have to publish it somewhere, right? So you've got services out there where you can buy your domain name and they'll host your website. Well, your website's going somewhere. You've built it and it's as secure as the application you've built it, but then you have to trust that the place that you're putting it doesn't have a path to access it as well. And that's the infrastructure. So like AWS has their fundamental server farm where we spin up our baseline infrastructure. And then we have application teams who build applications and deploy it to our infrastructure. The infrastructure, when I say our, that trust is built on top of AWS. So even as I'm saying it out loud, I can realize like the hops to break it, right? If AWS goes down, we're in a bad way, right? If our infrastructure that we've built in AWS goes down, or if we've misconfigured shell access, SSH access, if we've misconfigured an IAM group, if we've punched a hole in the wrong port on the firewall, we're going to have a bad day. So there are places to break that. And then we think, okay, we've got our infrastructure all tuned up, all tied down. We're ready for the application team now to put the furniture in. But we missed a piece of plumbing. Well, if that gives the outside world access to the application layer, infrastructure's failed miserably. The application team's mad because they've done everything they could do to make sure their app was secure, but then we haven't given them a secure foundation to put their app in. So I know that's kind of convoluted way to think of it, but it's I want you to think of it as easier rather than harder. When people are like, I'm an infrastructure engineer, you know, I'm an infrastructuralist, I do these things and magic, you know, it's not that complicated. It's just think of it like, oh, that's the house, and oh, this team's building the furniture. Cool. Burn down the house if you want to pen test, burn down the furniture, throw in a tornado, right? Like whatever path you want to take to breaking stuff, there are plenty. Cool.
So do you ever hire early career folks? So folks who are just starting up?
So at TrustWorks, we are a consultancy, we're infrastructuralists. We had been on a path for a long time hiring senior folk, because when we bring in contracts, they want to have senior folk staffed on their project. So cool, but that doesn't really that doesn't feel great all the time, right? Like my goal is for folks to not have to go through what I went through. Everyone doesn't have the nerve to just go bust into the other class they want to be in and be like, I go here now. So for me, the mission has been to figure out how we could bring in less senior folk, how we can open up our pipeline, and trust is the hands down most diverse place I've ever worked, and I don't use that word lightly. We track daily and update weekly what our percentage of non-males are, and we make that public to the company. Our salaries are public within the company, but our bands are public outside to applicants. We So we have been putting systems in place, so to answer your question, to support folks who are not senior. So this last round of InfraSec cohorts that I'm hiring are L2. Right now, on an L1 to 5 scale, right now L2 is what I believe I hate to say lowest level, but the lesser, the most inexperienced levels that I can support right now, because I'm planning to bring in 3 out of this round of cohorts. So that means that I expect that I'm going to need to have at least 6 senior folk able to support these L2s that come in, because there'll be a mentoring component, a shadowing component, and then training on a project. And so if you bring in too many folk starting out in their career without the ability to support them, you've done them a disservice. And that's the last thing I want to do when my goal has been to create more diversity within our hiring pipeline. It's important to be able to support those folks. So that said, I did want to try an experiment bringing in an L1. So I brought in an L1 last year, our very first one, as our IT specialist. We didn't have one of those. So the plan, I set up a 1-year plan to train this person and have all the folk in the InfraSec practice at some point pair with this person to teach them a different facet of everything from asset management to backups to how to use GitHub. Like we went with the basics, how to set up a repo. And then we gave this person a certain number of hours each week to study a language, and they picked Python, and great. So they're learning Python. So we'll hit the 1-year mark in July, but I think slightly ahead of schedule, this person will move from the L1 IT specialist role into L1 InfraSec. And then that leaves me room to backfill my L1 IT specialist role, which is an entry level, maybe had a job for a year doing help desk. Like that's the level this role starts at. So this has been part of our journey together at Trust, figuring out how, okay, we've reached this peak in our field with seniors, and we have this level of privilege. Now, how do we like help other people come up with us? And it's been super rewarding and super fulfilling. And I hope it has for the for the junior folk that we've brought in too.
Awesome. All right. So our next question is, do you think that a lack of cloud experience will hinder any type of security role?
So I can tell you for me, it does not, because I just told you the story of the L3 I brought in who had no cloud experience, but had a security background, had built a pipeline using Python, but self-taught. And we put them on our what we call reserve team when they started. And they were there for 2 months, having the time and space to study for, and as of 2 weeks ago, successfully take and pass the Sec Plus exam. So these roles are out there. I think that it's okay if you haven't had a security role, a cloud role, right? A cloud-based security role. But also I think it's a good idea to have some experience, like understanding what it all means, because inevitably it's going to come up at an interview. So AWS, GCP, I'm not sure about Azure, but I know AWS and GCP have free tiers that you can, even if it's just spin up a trial for 7 days and spin something up, I would highly recommend just doing that, trying it, seeing what it all means, go through the tutorial videos on YouTube if you're not able to, if you don't have a credit card and can't set up the trial, that's okay. There's plenty of tutorials on YouTube so that if it comes up in an interview, well, I don't see any cloud security experience on your resume. No, I haven't had the opportunity to do that yet, but I have been watching a lot of cloud security tutorial videos. I've been watching AWS infrastructure videos. I set up a trial for myself on GCP and just tried to stand up it's always fun, like a Heroku site, right? So any of these little places where you can find your cheap to free path in to just figuring out what some of this stuff is, demystifying it for yourself is the best way to not choke if somebody asks you about it in an interview. And it is okay to say, no, I don't have that experience professionally, but I built this little thing and you can check it out on my GitHub repo. If you don't have a GitHub repo, there you go. That's your first tutorial to watch. And that is free.
All right. So you also do some work with I think on the side as far as like mock resume and maybe I think it was mock interviews perhaps. Do you want to talk a little bit about the work that you do outside of, I guess, Trust?
Sure. Thank you for asking. I'm super excited about that project. So the project's called MIRR, M-I-R-R, Mock Interview and Resume Review Workshop. It started as a way to pair folks from underrepresented communities in tech with folks who are willing to mentor and ask questions that would be asked of the candidate in an interview, whether that's technical, cultural, or anything in between. What your resume should look like. So this wasn't and still isn't a place for folks to practice interviewing people or to practice reviewing resumes. These are professional folk who have agreed to review resumes because they're hiring managers in their day-to-day or have been, or on HR side, know what to look for, experienced interviewers who know what to ask. And so the materials for Mirror up on GitHub. There's also Franklin Diaz is on the call now, was gracious enough to help set up a Heroku site for the Mirror workshop so that folks could go in and print out sample questions for interviews and just see what sample technical questions look like, things like that. So I took it to, the very first place I took it was to DerbyCon Security Conference in 2015 or 16, maybe. And it was a hit, like every spot was taken. It only works if volunteers step up, and I was overwhelmed by the number of volunteers who stepped up. A Leslie Carthart, Hacks for Pancakes, is doing Pancakes Con and a version of this. Leslie and I ended up doing our first workshop together and subsequent live workshops together. But I kind of took the repo with a life of its own and made it an open source project where folks could contribute, so that it wasn't, again, it's about gatekeeping, right? Not everyone can go to a security conference. That these expensive ones, but a lot of towns have, not right now because it's a pandemic, but like B-sides or free local events. And the goal was that anyone could take this framework to their local community and pair mentors and mentees with each other to just help folk get jobs, or to level up at their jobs, or, to understand how to negotiate salaries, or ask those tough questions to know whether or not an employer really does have a commitment to diversity, or if they're just checking a box. Red flags to look for on job postings that feel like a little bit cringy, like sports references, right? That it's not always going to be, it's good that they let you know what kind of culture it is, but may not always be the best culture for everyone. So yeah, the Mirror Project. You too, anyone here, could pull down that the information from that repo and spin up your own pairing mentors and mentees. I have not found a way to do it remotely, but also I have like 4 jobs right now. So if you manage to run it remotely, and you have tips and tricks that work or don't work, add a comment to the repo. It's great. And then it'll just make its way into this, I see, as a community contribution project.
I don't think I've seen any other questions, but I had one. As a hiring manager, how do you feel about seeing, for example, stuff that people do in their home labs? So, not necessarily work experience, but, as experience outside that, kind of helps connect the dots from, say, your Old Navy to your penetration testing?
I as a hiring manager love that, because I don't get to meet any of our candidates, and I don't review a lot of resumes. I get folks when they've made it through. I hate to call it a gauntlet, but it can kind of be in tech, right? Now we've got like intro interviews, behavioral, technical, and then the hiring manager interview. So as a hiring manager, my questions are always, what brings you joy? What do you do in your day to day? Where do you lose yourself? Where do you lose time? Help me understand how this job is going to be a good fit for those things that bring you joy. And it's okay. Like, too, it's okay if it's not like my home lab, or one of the folks I work with right now is really into gardening, and so they're building a raspy mesh network to like with an app to tell them how much sun and water their plants need so they don't die. I mean, finding those ways to just tie in like passion projects, those kind of things will put people over the top for me, because again, I'm more interested in the holistic view of the human. And if you love to do hack the box, cool, tell me about it. If you're really into doing hacker rank challenges right now, let's talk about it. I think it's important to bring what you feel like is the best in you to that hiring manager interview. And if you don't get it, that's okay. Like, you were extra and they weren't ready for you. And the next company, that comes along that embraces that is the place that you're supposed to be anyway. And I know it sounds real, mystical, but I do think like the universe has a plan for you, and it might not be what you thought it was. So I think don't hold back on those things that you think, if you're being interviewed by 4 senior level pen testers and you think they won't be interested that you've done a couple challenges on Hack the Box, like, that's the story in your head. You will be you'll psych yourself out if you let, if you let your brain do that to you. Just bring your joy. And if your joy is your home lab, get ready to like move your camera around and show them your home lab, or get ready just to say, would it be okay if I share my screen with you for just like 5 minutes, and have that thing ready that you want to show off? Like, this is my repo, but look, if you click here, it kicks off the pipeline. And look, Franklin, who's on the call now, may have a blog post or something along those lines, but he built his resume like in a Heroku app with a full CI/CD pipeline to like build changes into his resume. But then when he like would give someone his resume, he's like, cool, here's what I do. And it's just like this, over engineered, cool project that he had a lot of fun with, and he could talk about it. And like bonus, it put his resume in front of a lot of people. So I don't know, thinking about those kind of things. Your home lab that's where you'll find your joy.
All right. So our last question, also, if anyone missed last week's Bring a Hacker to Work Day, Franklin was actually our guest, so you can check that out on YouTube. But our last question is, do you think that a college degree is worth it as far as a career in security engineering?
Well, far be it for me to dismiss higher education. I think that you have to take the path that works for you. I will tell you, my master's is in art. I have an MFA in new media theory. I could not have gotten my first job with the federal government without that degree, because a master's degree was a requirement for the role that I took. Didn't matter what my master's was in, right? It was a checkbox for that particular application. I think the best thing to do is to look at the job that you want, look at the companies that offer it, look at the requirements they have. If you are a school learner and that works for you, learn in school if you can. If you're a crash course, watch the videos, short attention span, hands-on person, learn that way. I myself, our company does not require college degrees, because we feel like that can be very gatekeepy and dismiss the level of privilege that a lot of folks have to be able to go to a 4-year school. That said, I don't in any way dismiss the 4-year education. It opened doors for me, for sure. So I think you just have to do what's best for you. Choose the path that seems to match the way to get where you need to be. And if it looks like, these companies that have these security engineering jobs want to see a degree in CS, look at the companies. Okay, that's the role you want, and you see the path to that role, but then who are the companies? Are these the kind of companies you'd want to work for? Because right off the bat, they're dismissing everyone who doesn't have that degree. So, it's this big picture thing, but is that really showing a commitment to diversity, in that they're looking holistically at diversity by looking at privilege, socioeconomic backgrounds, neurodiversity, how folks learn. Some folks are terrible test takers and will never be able to pass a certification exam, and it does not mean that they're not geniuses in their fields. So I know that was a really long answer. I just think do you do you.
I was just going to say, I appreciate it, and I actually love that perspective. So we thank you so much for your time. So anyone, if you would like to follow Kimber, she is on, I think, Twitter and Instagram as is it MS Bat or MZ Bat?
MZ, so Ms. Bat. Because I'll just tell you real quick, back in the days of IRC, when there weren't many hacker girls, or if you were very obviously a girl on IRC, you were sexually harassed on the regular. So we added MZ to the beginning of our names as a way to spot each other. So that just stuck. So that's Ms. Bat. You will see every now and then some OG hackers with MZ in front of their names.
That's dope. All right, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you. Please check out Kimber on social media and also her Mirror project. And thank you, Franklin, for coming out and hanging with us again. I appreciate your time, Kimber, and I thank you for doing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone, have a good day and take care.